First thing you want to do is remove the positive cable from the battery, so when you start pulling the wires off the alternator you don't short anything out. This is an 8mm nut. I've already loosened it up, so we're just going to wiggle a little bit and get that off of there. Get it to the side. There we go. Okay, I'm going to replace the alternator on my 2006 Mustang GT. I got the code P0340. Says it was a cam sensor. After reading the forums, said it's common that the alternator goes bad. So I took it to Advanced Auto. They tested it and said open diode. So I'll have to splice this video together because I'm doing it with an iPhone. So have a little patience and I'll get started. Okay, I'll try and do this part one-handed. We got to remove the throttle body, unhook the PCV hose, and disconnect the throttle position sensor. So just pull out the little red tab, push in on it, and it unplugs. There's a little green tab underneath, push that and pull out on that. Then take your screwdriver, obviously, and loosen the cold air intake too. And these bolts here are 8mm, and we'll get to that next. Okay. I forgot to mention the throttle actuator. Pull out the tab again, push down on the button, and disconnect that. And then just start loosening the 8mm bolts. You guys don't want to see all that, so I'll do that and come back. Okay, I thought I'd mention the bottom nuts for the throttle body are 10mm. Okay, once those are removed, gently pull it off. Hey look, there's the alternator. And I got myself a little box just to keep the nuts and bolts in so I don't lose them everywhere. And they've said on the forums this is a good time to clean your throttle body. So get yourself some good carburetor cleaner and spray it down, clean them up. The next part is to remove that serpentine belt. I got a 1/2-inch breaker bar put on there. And I don't know if I can do this with one hand, but watch the tension of the belt loosen up when I push down on the breaker bar. So that's all you're going to do. Push down, loosen the tension, and then pull the belt off. Okay, that was simple. The breaker bar is loosened it up, took the belt off. Now we got a few bolts to remove. This bolt for the bracket is a 10mm. These little ones are 8mm in the back. That's a 10. You don't have to remove the 8mm right now. Come down to the bottom of the alternator. You see 2 bolts there. Those are 13mm. Remove those 2 13mm and the 2 upper 10mm. Okay, just to give you a little of the boring stuff. They break loose pretty easy. I already broke these loose, and I took the 2 10mm bolts off. So I'll get those loose and then we'll cut back into the video. Sorry, I'm not a pro at this video stuff. Okay, the 13mm nuts are out of there. The 10mm bolts are off. The only thing we have to do is remove this little wire loom. Little wiggle in there, and it pulls that plastic spike right out of there. There it is. And then we can pull the alternator out and get ready to unplug the back. Okay, there's the back of the alternator. You pull this rubber boot off and remove the 10mm nut there, and then we'll unplug the alternator from the harness there. So I'll get to that and we'll show the rest. Okay, we'll try and do this one-handed. After I've disconnected the battery cable, just push down on the button here and unplug it. And there you have it. The alternator's out. All we have to do now is take our 8mm socket, remove these two bolts here so we can take the bracket off, and put the new alternator back on. So another thing I read in all the forums was to take and clean the mass airflow sensor. I don't know how to clean that, so I'm gonna have to look it up in the forum. But when I replaced the cold air intake, it was just a simple unplug that harness and two bolts there to get that out. So I'll read about that and see what is needed to do that. But I am going to clean the throttle plates. Be careful not to lose your plenum gasket there. And let's get ready to install the new alternator. Okay, so I cleaned the throttle body out, front and back side. The back side was pretty black and full of grime. Make sure you push on the butterflies to get the ridges of the butterflies. And if you look, I'll see if I can get it in the sunlight, you'll see there's a little gap there as I look at it in the sunlight. Once you clean those ridges in that, I guess carbon, whatever that black crap is, off the throttle body ports, that helps with a smoother idle. If it's all blocked up with that black stuff, you can get a little rough idle there. So it's a good time to clean that throttle body when you have the alternator off. Okay, so now that I got the throttle body clean, I was going to clean my mass airflow sensor, and I looked it up on YouTube, and a guy had one for a 2006 Mustang GT just like mine. Absolutely do not use carburetor cleaner to clean your mass airflow sensor. Repeat, do not use carburetor cleaner. He used CRC mass airflow sensor cleaner. So I'm gonna run to the parts store and get some of that while I got it all apart, just for my own peace of mind. Look up that YouTube video. Okay, well, I went and bought some of the CRC mass airflow sensor cleaner. Pulled the mass airflow sensor out. I'm gonna spray it down. It says spray it down with about 10 to 15 squirts and let it sit and dry for about 15 minutes. It also says on the back of the can to use it on, not to use it on certain cars like the Toyota Supra turbos, Mitsubishi, and Lexus. We're on a Mustang GT, so we're far from that. And I picked this stuff up. It was only $8. Okay, there's the new alternator. While I let the mass airflow sensor dry, I'm going to install the alternator. So we got to put this bracket back on with the 8mm bolts first. They'll sit on top of there with your little tab here for the wire harness on the left hand side. Or as you're facing the car, it'll be the passenger side. So tighten those 8mm bolts up first, and then we'll set it in place. When you look at the plug, you'll plug right back in. Make sure your positive cable goes right into the notch so it doesn't slide back and forth, and then you can tighten up the nut. So that's what it'll look like, and then the boot will slide right. And there it is. Plugged in, the boot is on. Make sure it's all snug into place. Now we're going to set it down on the studs down here at the bottom. Let's see. There's two studs that the U bolts, or the U-shaped bracket on the alternator sit in. Then your 10mm bolts bolt up there with the bracket on the top. So I'm sure you don't want to be bored with that, so I'm just going to set it in place and tighten it down. Before I tighten it up, I wanted to show you. It took a little wiggle to get in there, so right now I just got the nuts on the studs just threaded on there. 10mm bolts just sitting in place. It's the cable. You want to make sure that doesn't get pinched into anything as you're setting it into place. So once you're sure it's not set into place, you could slide that little plastic stud in there to hold the harness in place. So now it's just tightening those up. Okay, I tightened the nuts at the bottom on the stud first so that they would line up on the top where the 10mm brackets are. There's a little bit of play in there that you can just thread them, make sure you can thread them in by hand for alignment purposes, so you're not going to tear up the aluminum threads. Get them snug and tighten them. There it is, all in place. Now I'm going to get my breaker bar, push down on the pulley tensioner, and set the belt back up on top of the pulley. There it is. The belt's back on the pulleys. I did notice that it slipped off on the AC unit and a couple of the idler pulleys. So double, even triple check. Make sure all your belts are on properly. Okay, double check your O-ring. Make sure it's still in the groove on the plenum there. And we're just gonna set the throttle body on the studs, set it in place, and put the bolts on, tighten it up. It's bolted back in there. What I did is kind of a cross tightening pattern from here up to this one, over and down. It's a nylon plenum, but it's got metal inserts, but I just wanted it to tighten on square so we don't have any gaps. So now we take the throttle position sensor and plug that in, put the little red tab in to lock it in place. Throttle motor, push it in, red tab in to lock it in place. And now we're going to put the mass airflow sensor back in the tube there, and then we'll put the hose on for the cold air intake. Okay, I got the tube in for the cold air intake. Just going to tighten that up. Not too snug, just snug enough so it makes a good seal. Switch hands here, see if I can do it. No, you don't care how I tighten that up. Let me just tighten that up and I'll be right back. It's snug in place. Both clamps are tightened down. So now all we have to do is hook the PCV back up. Just push it in and you'll hear a click. I'll see if I can get close so you can hear the click. There you go. And it just clicked into place. So now just double check all your work and then hook up your battery and start it up and all should be good. Okay, battery's hooked up. I double checked all my work. Then I went to the box where I store my parts as I disassemble, and I found one nut left over and I panicked. What is this from? The new alternator came with a new bolt or a new nut to tighten up the positive. So this is the old nut. Panic gone. Okay, there it is. Running, beautiful. No howling, no belt squeal. Looks like everything's working. Air conditioning is kicked on. I hope that helps you on your install. Thanks and have a good day.